On a stormy winter night, just as he was about to close his small diner, a black man heard a sudden knock on the door. He froze when he saw an elderly couple standing outside, shivering in their torn, worn-out clothes. Without hesitation, he welcomed them in, served them a hot meal on the house, gave them a place to rest, and even handed over his truck, the last valuable thing he owned, the next morning. What he didn't know was that the couple he helped were actually billionaires, and his simple act of kindness was about to come back and change his life forever. Before we dive in, where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me, and don't forget to hype and subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The wind had been howling for hours, slamming against the windows of Whitaker's Haven like it wanted in. James stood behind the counter, wiping down the same spot he'd already cleaned twice. The diner should have been closed by now. Hell, every place in town was dark, but something told him to keep the lights on a little longer. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the storm pressing in on him harder than usual. Whatever it was, he stayed. A sudden thud rattled the front door. James looked up. For a second he thought it was the wind again. But the shape behind the glass didn't move with the storm. It stood still, hunched, almost swallowed by the snow. He walked over and unlocked the door. Two people stepped inside, an elderly couple dressed in layers that looked more like quilts than coats. Snow clung to their shoulders. Their boots left wet prints on the tile. The man held the woman's hand carefully, as if she might slip away if he let go. James felt something tighten in his chest. They looked tired in a way food and sleep alone didn't fix. "Come on in," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Sit wherever you'd like." The couple didn't answer. They just nodded and shuffled to a booth near the corner, far from the windows, close to the heater. The woman's lips trembled as she eased into the seat. The man kept glancing over his shoulder, then up toward the security camera above the counter. James noticed. He also pretended not to. He grabbed 2 mugs, poured hot coffee and brought them over. The man's hands shook a little as he wrapped his fingers around the cup. The woman held hers close to her face, breathing in the steam as if it alone might warm her bones. "You folks traveling through?" James asked gently. The man hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window again. "Just passing by." James didn't push. He could tell they didn't want questions, and honestly he wasn't in the mood to be suspicious. Not tonight. Not with the storm turning the world outside into a blank sheet of white. He brought out warm plates, soup, toasted sandwiches, and a slice of pie he hadn't planned on giving to anyone. When the woman whispered a quiet, "Thank you," barely louder than the wind, something inside James settled. As he walked back to the counter, he saw the man glance toward the camera again. Not the quick, curious glance strangers usually gave. This was different, sharp, calculating, almost fearful. James felt a subtle shift in the air. Not danger. Not exactly. Just something unspoken. He watched them from behind the counter, not out of suspicion but out of a feeling he couldn't name yet. Maybe it was the way the man held himself, protective, tense. Maybe it was the way the woman kept wiping her eyes, as if they'd seen more than a single storm that day. Outside, the snow kept rising. The world kept disappearing. Inside, the diner felt like the last warm place left in the county. James cleared his throat. "If you two need a place to rest for the night, the back booth's long enough to stretch out. Heater works fine back there." The woman looked at him like she wasn't used to kindness. The man looked at him like he didn't know whether to trust it. But finally, after a long moment, the man nodded once, slow and grateful. James gave them space. He turned off the neon sign, flipped the diner to closed and dimmed the lights. As he walked past their booth to lock the back door, he caught one last glimpse of the man. Eyes fixed on the window, jaw tight, shoulders braced. Not against the cold, but against something, or someone, still out there in the storm. James paused. He didn't know their story. But whatever chased them, whatever made a man stare at a window like that, he had a feeling the storm outside wasn't the only thing they were running from. And for tonight, this diner was the only shelter they had. James woke up earlier than usual, long before the sun pushed through the storm clouds. The diner was cold, the kind of cold that crept up from the floorboards. He rubbed his hands together as he walked out front. The booth where the couple slept was empty. Blankets folded, cups rinsed, a quiet kind of goodbye. They were gone. James let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He'd expected at least a note, maybe a whispered thank you before they left. But he also knew people running from something tended to move before the world woke up. He grabbed a cloth and started wiping the table out of habit. The booth still held the warmth from where they'd been sitting. Then he noticed it, something small tucked between the cushions. A square piece of metal, thin, dark, clean in a way that didn't match their worn-out clothing. When he picked it up, it felt heavier than it should have, like a piece of something important. A faint glow blinked along one edge, too faint to be an accident. It definitely wasn't from the diner. James turned it over in his hand. He had no clue what it was, but one thing was clear. This wasn't the kind of thing someone down on their luck would just be carrying around. It looked expensive, technical, almost medical or high-end tech, something big companies kept locked in drawers. He felt a small pull of worry. Maybe they hadn't meant to leave it behind. Maybe this was the reason the man kept glancing at the cameras. Maybe this was why they moved before dawn. James walked to the front door and looked out into the pale morning light. Snow still covered the empty street, but the tracks from their boots had already filled in. They were long gone. He slipped the metal piece into his pocket. He wasn't the type to snoop. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. But he knew the world well enough to recognize that when someone left something valuable behind in the middle of a storm, things weren't simple. He made himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. The diner was quiet, too quiet for morning. Usually by this hour, old Mr. Perry would walk in, complaining about his back, or the local mailman would grab his usual breakfast burrito. Not today, just silence, just the storm fading and whatever this thing in his pocket was. James shook his head, trying to shrug off the feeling. People passed through. Stuff got lost. Life kept moving. Still he couldn't stop replaying the way the man stared at the window. Not like he was cold, like he expected someone to burst through the glass at any second. That thought didn't sit right. James walked to the booth again, searching for anything else they might have left. A glove, a receipt, a name scribbled on a napkin. Nothing. Only that strange blinking piece of tech now warming in his pocket. He closed the shades halfway, suddenly aware of how exposed the diner felt in the early light. He didn't know what they were running from. He didn't know why they chose his diner. But the moment he looked at that piece of metal again, he felt it deep in his chest. Whatever followed them into the storm might not be gone yet. And this morning, this quiet, uneasy morning, was the beginning of something he hadn't asked for. But it was already here. The storm eased by mid-morning, leaving behind a sky that looked washed out and tired, same as James. He stood behind the counter refilling napkin holders, trying to shake the uneasy weight sitting in his pocket. The metal chip hadn't stopped blinking its faint pulse. Every time he touched it, his stomach tightened a little. The bell above the door stayed silent. No regulars, no tourists, nobody wanting pancakes, nobody asking about the weather. It wasn't normal, but storms always messed with the rhythm of the town. James tried to convince himself everything was fine. But the booth still smelled like the old couple's damp coats, and that made it harder to believe anything was normal. He brewed another pot of coffee he didn't need, just something to do with his hands. The smell filled the diner, warm and familiar, but even that comfort couldn't settle him. Then the bell above the door rang. Not the soft chime of a regular, pushing the door open with a cold hand. This was sharp, hard, like someone hit the door on their way in. James looked up. A black SUV was parked crooked in front of the diner, big, shiny, the kind of vehicle people didn't usually drive through a small town unless they wanted attention. 3 men stepped inside, not locals. He knew that immediately. Their jackets were too clean, their boots too new. Their eyes scanned everything too fast. One of them, tall, squared jaw, hair slicked back like a TV politician, walked straight to the counter. "You the owner?" he asked, voice flat. James nodded slowly. "Yeah, coffee." The man didn't smile. "No, we're looking for a couple, older, white, wore shabby clothing." He paused, searching for the right word but landing on something ugly. "They looked homeless." James's heartbeat thudded once, deep and noticeable. He kept his face neutral. "Haven't seen anyone like that today," he said. The second man stepped forward. He was shorter but broader, the type who filled a doorway without trying. He placed both hands on the counter and leaned in a little. "You sure? Storm last night was bad. Bad enough that people would have been looking for shelter." His tone wasn't friendly. James didn't blink. "Storm was rough, yeah, but I close early on nights like that." The men exchanged a look, quick but loaded. The third guy, the quiet one with a sharp stare, let his gaze drift across the diner. His eyes lingered on the booth where the couple had slept. Then he turned to James with a smirk that held no humor. "You get many drifters around here, friend?" he asked. "No more than any other roadside diner," James said. "Folks pass through." Again the men exchanged glances. Something wasn't adding up for them. Something wasn't adding up for James either. The tall man slid his hand into his jacket. James's muscles tensed, but the man only pulled out a phone, tapping rapidly before lifting his gaze to meet James's. "If you do see them, you call us, immediately." He set a card on the counter. No name, no company, just a number and a symbol etched into the corner, an abstract shape that looked like a stylized circuit. James didn't reach for it. The man's eyes drifted to the small security camera in the corner of the diner. "Cameras still working after the storm." "Mostly," James said. "Sometimes the power flickers." Another lie. He hated how easily it came out. But something told him the truth wasn't safe in this moment. The broad man stepped toward the back hallway. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" "Yeah," James said immediately. "I do mind." His voice came out firmer than he expected. But he held eye contact and didn't apologize. All three men paused. Silence filled the diner, thick, tense, hot in the center of James's stomach. The tall man finally lifted his hands as if to show peace. "Relax, we're not here to cause trouble, just making sure two vulnerable people are safe." "Funny," James said quietly. "You don't look like social workers." A long second passed. The tall man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "If you see them," he repeated, tapping the card once, "call us before you call anyone else. That's important." He said it slowly, emphasizing every word, a warning disguised as a request. The three men walked out the door. The SUV's engine roared as they drove off, tires kicking slush behind them. James locked the door, even though it was daylight. For a moment, he just stood there, hand on the lock, head bowed. His breath felt heavier than the air around him. He didn't know who those men were. He didn't know who the old couple really were. But he knew enough these guys weren't searching out of kindness. He looked at the card still sitting on the counter. The symbol in the corner caught a shine under the diner lights. Something about it felt familiar, like the faint glow pulsing on the chip in his pocket. He reached down and touched the metal piece through his jeans. It pulsed once, faint like a heartbeat. That tiny flicker sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just something valuable. It was something people were willing to intimidate strangers for. James walked to the booth where the couple had been sitting, and ran his hand across the table, as if it still held their warmth. He could picture the man's anxious eyes, flicking toward the camera. The woman's trembling hands, the fast escape at dawn. Whatever they were caught in, it was bigger than this diner, bigger than this town. But James didn't owe anything to those three men. And he wasn't about to hand over two terrified strangers to people who looked like they broke things for a living. He slid the unknown chip deeper into his pocket. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know what he'd do if they returned. But he knew one thing. If danger was on its way to Whitaker's Haven, he wasn't letting it find the couple through him. Not after last night. Not after the way they'd looked at him, like he was the only safe place left in a frozen world. The diner stayed quiet long after the SUV disappeared down the road. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace, more like a warning. James stood behind the counter staring at the door, half expecting the men to come back. He was still replaying every second of the conversation, their tone, their stare, the way they scanned the place like they were checking for heat signatures. He didn't like it. He didn't like any of it. After a minute he walked into the back room and pulled out his coat. It wasn't new. It wasn't warm enough for another storm. But it was what he had. He couldn't sit here pretending everything was fine. Those two had trusted him enough to walk into his diner last night. Trusted him enough to sleep under his roof, and now they were out there somewhere, walking through snow with people like those men hunting them down. He pushed open the diner door and locked it behind him. The cold slapped him instantly. Sharp, icy. The kind that made your eyes water and your breath turn to silver. James shoved his hands into his pockets and headed toward his truck. His boots crunched through the snow, leaving dark prints behind him. The wind scraped across his face as if trying to push him back inside. He didn't stop. He climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, engine off, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. Most people in town had a policy: don't get involved, let other folks deal with their own mess. But James had never been good at that. He started the engine. The truck groaned awake, old and stubborn, coughing at the cold like an old man. James gave the dashboard a light pat. Come on, buddy. Not today. He pulled out of the lot and headed toward the narrow side road behind the diner, the one he'd told the couple about last night, the shortcut he used whenever he wanted to avoid the main highway. Snow covered everything. Trees hung heavy with frost. The sky looked like it hadn't decided whether it wanted to break open again. James drove slowly, scanning every inch of the forest line to the right. The couple couldn't have gotten far, not in this weather, not at their age. A mile in, the road narrowed until the truck barely fit between the snowbanks. James kept going. Every few seconds he leaned forward, squinting, trying to catch movement through the trees. Then he saw it. Not a person, but footprints. Two sets, one light, one dragging slightly, heading off the road, into the trees. James stopped the truck so fast the tires skidded. He stepped out, the cold hitting him even harder than before. He ignored it, slamming the door and following the prints. They were messy, uneven, like the couple had been struggling. Like the woman was tired, falling behind. The trees closed in the deeper he walked. Snow sat heavy on the branches, shaking loose in soft flurries every time the wind brushed past. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under his boots and his own breath. After 5 minutes, he saw something ahead. A shape, dark. Still, his heart jumped hard enough to hurt. He walked faster. Hello, you all right? The shape didn't move. James picked up speed, breath fogging thick in the cold. When he reached the clearing, he realized it wasn't a person lying in the snow. It was a shed. Old wooden, leaning to one side like it might collapse if someone sneezed near it. But there was movement behind it. A flicker, a shift, a shadow. James slowed, raising both hands slightly to show he wasn't a threat. Hey, he called. It's me, from the diner. For a second nothing happened. Then the elderly man stepped out, holding a broken piece of branch like it was a weapon. His face was pale, eyes wide and sharp, as if he'd been waiting all night for someone to find them. Someone who wasn't friendly. The woman appeared behind him, gripping his arm. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Her breath came out in thin shivers. James's chest tightened. They looked worse than he expected. You're here, the man said, voice cracking from exhaustion and fear. I came to make sure you were safe, James answered. Those guys from this morning. They were looking for you. The man's grip on the branch tightened. His gaze flicked toward the forest, then back to James. You talked to them. Didn't tell them anything. The man hesitated. The woman tugged lightly on his sleeve, whispering something James couldn't hear. James took a slow step forward. Look, my truck's warm. I can take you somewhere safer. Neither moved. James could see the doubt in their eyes. The fear, the second guessing. They'd survived something serious, that much was clear, and trusting the wrong person once could have cost them their lives. He couldn't blame them for hesitating. So he did the only thing that made sense. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his truck keys. He held them out, arm extended. If you don't trust me to drive, James said quietly, take the truck, I'll walk back. The man blinked, stunned. The woman covered her mouth as if trying not to cry. I mean it, James added. The road's straight, take it as far as you need. For a long moment nobody moved. Snowflakes drifted between them, slow and silent. Then something in the man's expression softened, his shoulders dropped. He lowered the broken branch. You devish your truck? He asked. Yeah, James said. That storm wasn't the only thing chasing you last night. The man looked at the keys again, then at James, searching for any sign of deceit. But all he found was a tired diner owner standing in the cold, willing to freeze his fingers off just to make sure two strangers stayed alive. The woman stepped forward first. Please, she whispered to her husband. Let him help. The man swallowed hard, then nodded. James took a step back, letting them approach. When they reached him, he placed the keys gently into the man's hand. Truck's a little old, James said with a half smile. But she's good. Heat kicks in after a minute. The man stared at the keys like they were something sacred. James turned to walk back toward the road, ready to make the long freezing hike on foot when he felt a hand on his arm. Wait, the man said. You should come with us. James paused. You sure? We trust you, the woman said softly. More than anyone else right now. James looked at them, two exhausted strangers clinging to each other in the cold, and nodded. They walked together back through the snow, slowly, step by step. When they reached the truck, the man opened the passenger door for the woman, then motioned for James to sit beside her. He did. When the man climbed behind the wheel, he hesitated, hands trembling slightly as he inserted the key. The engine roared to life, warm air starting to hum through the vents. The woman whispered, "Thank you for coming back for us." James didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. As they pulled away from the forest, snow swirling around the truck, he realized something simple but undeniable: helping them wasn't the safest choice. Not for him, not even close. But looking at them now, fragile, scared, holding on to the only bit of safety they'd been offered in days, it was the choice that felt right. Whatever danger they were running from, it wasn't his business. But keeping them safe for one more hour, one more mile, that was. James spent the next 2 days pretending everything was normal, even though nothing felt that way anymore. The truck had barely cooled from the ride back before the couple stepped out and disappeared into the white horizon, thanking him softly before heading down the road. James didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask what they were running from. All he did was watch until their silhouettes blended into the storm, and the sound of the engine faded into nothing. After that, the town fell into a strange, uneasy quiet. The diner felt different, like someone had turned the volume of life all the way down. Chairs that usually scraped against the floor stayed still. Doors that normally opened every 15 minutes didn't move. Even the coffee tasted quieter somehow. James tried keeping busy, wiping counters that were already clean and rearranging sugar packets no one would touch. But the silence kept pushing back, reminding him something wasn't right. Every time he reached into his pocket and felt the cold metal of the chip the couple had left behind, the diner seemed to shrink a little more, like the walls had started listening. He didn't like how that felt. On the first night after they were gone, he sat alone in the corner booth, the same one they'd slept in. The cushions were cold again, no imprint left from the night before. He stared at the window where the man used to watch the storm, half expecting to see someone standing outside. But the street was empty, just snow drifting lazily under the street lamp. The second morning was worse. Not because something bad happened, actually nothing happened at all, and that was the problem. People avoided the diner more than usual. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the tension hanging over the whole town, the kind everyone felt but didn't talk about. Or maybe, James thought, word had already started spreading. He didn't know how stories traveled so fast in a small town, but they always did. And though no one came in to ask questions, it didn't mean no one was wondering why a black SUV had pulled up to the diner yesterday, or why 3 men in dark jackets were seen leaving with faces like they'd swallowed nails. James caught a few glances through the windows, neighbors walking by, looking inside longer than they needed to. The kind of stare that wasn't curiosity but quiet suspicion. He tried ignoring it. He fired up the grill, fried bacon he'd end up throwing out, and cooked a pot of chili no one came to order. The routine felt hollow, like acting in a play with no audience. By noon, even the radio felt like it was avoiding conversation, static between stations. The weather forecast repeating the same warning every hour: cold fronts, Ice patches, stay indoors. He paced behind the counter trying to push away the feeling that something was about to happen. Not something loud or sudden, but something that slipped quietly into his day and change everything. He decided to step outside and clear the walkway. Snow removal always helped him think. As he shoveled, he noticed the neighbor across the street, old Mrs. Dalton, peeking out her curtains. When their eyes met, she shut the blinds fast enough for him to hear it click. That stung more than he expected. James wasn't used to being looked at like someone carrying trouble. By late afternoon, he was back inside, flipping through the TV channels for background noise. Cooking shows, a rerun of an old crime documentary, a talk show about holiday recipes. None of it meant anything. All he could think about was the couple walking away and the 3 men who'd come looking for them. Every time he touched the chip, he felt a small jolt of cold, not like technology cold, but the kind of cold that meant danger. Around 5, the bell above the door finally rang. James's head snapped up so fast he felt something crack in his neck, but it wasn't danger walking in. It was Roy, the long-haul trucker who passed through town twice a month. He stomped snow off his boots and shook his head. "Storm's still ugly out there," Roy said. James gave him a tired smile. "You picking up a load?" "Nah," Roy said as he slid into a booth. "Got stranded, figured I'd stop in. Also," he lowered his voice, "wanted to check on you." That caught James off guard. "Me?" Roy nodded. "Heard some fellas in a black SUV asking around town. Not the friendly kind. Saw them pull into Miller's gas station, barking questions like they owned the place." James's stomach tightened. Roy continued. "They were headed toward the forest trail. The one behind your diner." James didn't say anything. Roy leaned back, studying him. "You know something about that?" James shook his head slowly. "Not really. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either." Roy didn't push. He just sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "People like that don't chase folks for no reason. Whatever they're mixed up in feels dangerous." James felt the weight of the chip against his thigh again. He kept his voice steady. "You think they'll come back?" Roy shrugged. "Guys like that always come back. They look for loose ends." James looked out the window. Snow piled higher than before, hiding everything underneath. Whatever tracks the couple left were long gone, swallowed by the storm. "Roy," James asked quietly, "if you were in trouble, real trouble, but didn't want to drag anyone into it, where would you go?" Roy let out a breath. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere off the road, a place folks forget exists." James felt something drop in his chest. He knew exactly where a person like that would hide. The old shed, the forest path, the cold, lonely shortcut he'd told them about. He looked back at Roy. "Thanks for stopping by." Roy gave him a small nod, the kind men like him used instead of good luck. When Roy left, James stood alone in the diner again, heart pounding harder now. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the pause before something important, something that needed him. He grabbed his coat, grabbed his gloves, locked the diner, and stepped into the cold. Snowflakes hit his face, sharp and fast. He headed down the alley where his truck should have been, but the space was empty. He smiled to himself. Right, he'd given away the truck. That meant he'd have to walk. Fine. He started down the road, boots sinking deep with every step, the wind cutting through his jacket. He didn't know if the couple was still out there, or if he'd find nothing but snow and a collapsed shed. But one thing kept pushing him forward. He couldn't shake the image of the woman trembling in the booth, or the man watching the door like a hunted animal. He didn't know what was waiting for him in the woods, but he knew this: if they needed help again, he wasn't going to be too late this time. 2 days after James trudged home through the brutal cold, he stood inside Whitaker's Haven wiping down the counter for the 100th time. The place looked cleaner than it had in months, but the quiet still made him restless. The couple hadn't returned. No one had seen them. The strange men hadn't come back either, but their presence lingered like cigarette smoke long after the flame had died. Every time the door creaked, James's heart jumped just a little. Not in fear, just anticipation. The kind that crawled into your chest and stayed there. Around noon, as the clouds outside finally parted enough to let some weak sunlight slip in, James poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned on the counter. He just brought the mug to his lips when the sound hit him. An engine. Not just any engine. Heavy, expensive, predictable in its smoothness. He froze mid-breath, eyes snapping to the window. A long black limousine eased into the parking lot. James blinked once, twice. Limousines didn't show up in this town. Not for good reasons, not for bad either. They just didn't show up. The back door opened with a soft hiss, and then he saw them. The old couple, only not like before. They stepped out dressed in clean wool coats, tailored and crisp, their posture straight, the exhaustion gone from their faces, replaced by something composed and strangely powerful. The woman adjusted her gloves with the quiet grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The man scanned the area, not with fear this time, but with the calculated awareness of someone used to assessing threats. James felt the world tilt under his feet. He pushed through the diner door before he realized what he was doing. "You," he said, voice caught somewhere between shock and relief. "You're all right." The woman smiled, small and warm. "Thanks to you." The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "James Whittaker," he said, as if confirming something he already knew. "We owe you more than we can ever pay back." James didn't take his hand at first. He was too busy trying to understand what he was seeing. What happened to you? I mean, last night you looked like people on the run." The man offered gently. James nodded. The man lowered his hand and sighed. "We weren't running from the storm, James. We were running from James didn't speak. Something inside him told him not to interrupt. The woman touched her husband's arm. "Maybe we should talk inside. It's still cold." James stepped aside and let them enter. As they walked in, the diner lights reflected off their coats, their shoes, their clean grooming, tiny details that made the memory of their ragged clothes feel unreal. They sat in the same booth as before. It felt symbolic somehow, like the universe tying two halves of a thread together. James sat across from them, hands clasped, fighting the urge to reach into his pocket for the chip. But he didn't, not yet. The man exhaled slowly. "My name is Elliot Kane." James's brow furrowed. The name scratched at something in his memory. Elliot continued, "I'm the founder and CEO of Kane Technologies." James froze. Kane Technologies. A company you heard about on the news anytime something big in tech happened. A name that belonged to billionaires on magazine covers, not old men wearing worn-out coats in the middle of a snowstorm. "You're joking," James said quietly. The woman shook her head. "I wish we were." Elliot glanced around the diner before leaning in. 3 nights ago, I was attacked while leaving one of our research facilities. Not a random crime, not a mugging, something targeted. They were after data, sensitive data tied to an internal project." James swallowed hard. "The chip," he whispered. Elliot nodded. "Yes, that chip. It holds encrypted access to a secure system, financial accounts, documents, internal controls, everything the attackers wanted." James tried to comprehend the jump from a tiny blinking piece of tech to the enormity of what Elliot was describing. "So the men who came in here were hired," Elliot said. "Not by good people." James leaned back slowly. His pulse thudded in his ears. He felt the weight of the chip again, heavier, sharper than before. The woman reached across the table, her fingers trembling just slightly. "We couldn't let them find you, or this place. You were kind to us when we were strangers. We didn't want that kindness to put you in harm's way." James blinked. "Then why come back?" "Because it's safe now," Elliot said. "The people behind the attack lost our trail. Our security team intervened. We've regained control of our system, mostly thanks to something you did." James frowned. "What'd I do?" "You held on to the chip," Elliot said, voice soft with a gratitude James didn't know how to handle. "You didn't hand it over. You didn't betray us. You helped us when we didn't even have the strength to help ourselves." James looked down, a little embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Elliot said firmly. "Most people wouldn't." The woman nodded. "Most people would have taken one look at us and locked the door." James didn't argue. He wasn't used to being praised. It made him uncomfortable. Elliot reached into his coat and placed a slim metal case on the table. The same symbol that had been on the business card, like a stylized circuit, was etched onto the lid. "This is for you," Elliot said. James didn't touch it. "What is it?" "A thank you," Elliot replied simply. "A real one, not words." James shook his head. "I don't need anything." "We know," the woman said softly. "That's why you deserve it more than anyone." Elliot pushed the metal case closer. "Open it." James swallowed and unclasped the lid. Inside was a check, not a normal check, a check with more zeros than James had ever seen in one place. He snapped the case shut like it burned him. "I can't take this." "Yes," Elliot said gently. "You can." "No, I helped you because it was right, not because I wanted this." He gestured vaguely at the case, unable to even say the number out loud. The woman leaned forward, her voice trembling. "James, you didn't just give us a ride, you gave us safety. You treated us like people when the world was hunting us like animals." James rubbed his hands over his face. The diner suddenly felt smaller, warmer, too warm. "I can't," he whispered. Elliot didn't push. He just nodded. "We respect that, truly." A long quiet moment passed. Snow tapped softly against the windows as if listening. Finally, Elliot reached into his coat again and placed something on the table. The chip, the same blinking piece James had found wedged between the booth cushions. "Thought you might want to give it back yourself," Elliot said. James stared at it, a strange relief washing through him. He slid it across the table toward Elliot. "Glad it's not my problem anymore," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Elliot smiled. "It never was, but you carried it anyway." They held each other's eyes for a moment. Two very different men connected by one impossible night. The woman stood, smoothing her coat. "We'll leave you to think about the check. Take your time." James also rose. "I appreciate it, really, but I don't think." Before he could finish, Elliot shook his head. "We didn't come here to buy your gratitude. We came to honor your kindness." James had no answer for that. As the couple walked back toward the limo, Elliot paused at the door and looked over his shoulder. "We'll be back, James." The door shut behind them. James stood alone in the diner, metal case still on the table, his mind spinning. They were alive, safe, powerful, real, and somehow, despite everything they'd survived, they had come back to him. For a long moment after the limo disappeared down the snowy road, James stood frozen in the middle of his diner, staring at the metal case on the table. It didn't belong in a place like this, not next to napkin dispensers and chipped coffee mugs, not under fluorescent lights that buzzed when the heater kicked in. It felt unreal, not the good kind of unreal, more like something dropped from a different world onto the wrong stage. He reached for it once, then pulled his hand back. He didn't need to count the zeros again. He didn't need to open it at all. Just knowing it was there made him uneasy. Money like that could change someone's life, but James wasn't sure he wanted his life changed. He'd lost too much already. His brother, years of chasing dreams, the clean slate he once thought adulthood would give him. The diner was the last thing he had left that felt like his own. And yet, here he was, standing with enough money to erase the worst parts of his past, if he chose to take it. He didn't. Not yet. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside for air. Snow was falling again, slow soft flakes that melted as soon as they touched his skin. The world felt strangely quiet, like the town was holding its breath. Maybe it sensed something was about to happen. Maybe James sensed it too. The next morning, the trouble arrived in the most ordinary way, through a knock on the door. 3 short taps, sharp, impersonal. James opened the door to find 2 men in dark coats and a woman holding a clipboard. He didn't recognize any of them, but the look on their faces, the stiff posture, that was familiar, official, cold, the kind of visit no one wanted. "Mr. Whitaker?" the woman asked. "Yeah, we're with Maple County Bank." James felt his stomach drop. "You here to talk about the loan?" "We're here to inform you of the final status," she replied, flipping a page. "Due to repeated delinquency and failure to meet the revised payment schedule, the property known as Whitaker's Haven is subject to reclamation." James blinked. Reclamation sounded almost gentle, like they wanted to borrow the place for the weekend, not take it away forever. "You mean you're taking my diner?" The woman hesitated, softening her voice, not out of kindness, more out of routine. "We've given 3 extensions. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker, but we can't grant another." James stared past them at the diner, at the windows he'd spent years wiping down, the sign he'd repainted by hand, the counter where he'd served half the town through heartbreaks and holidays. Losing it felt like losing a part of his own body. "When?" he asked quietly. 3 days. James swallowed hard. "That soon? The property is behind on taxes as well." The county is prepared to proceed. He looked down at his hands. Cold wind stung his fingers, but he barely felt it. His voice came out rough. There has to be another way. The woman shook her head. I'm sorry. They handed him a stack of papers and walked away. No explanation, no sympathy, just a job done. The SUV they climbed into drove off in seconds, tires crunching over ice. James stood alone in the parking lot, the world spinning too fast and too slow at the same time. He walked back inside, dropped the papers on the counter, and stared at them like they were written in a language he didn't know. Maybe in a way, they were. A language about losing everything. He didn't know how long he stood there before the bell above the door rang again. Softer this time. Warmer. His niece stepped inside, brushing snow from her hair and cheeks. She was 21, studying 2 states over, and the only family he had left. She ran into his arms, the second she saw his face. Uncle James, she said, pulling back to study him. You look like you haven't slept in a week. James forced a smile. I'm all right. No you're not, she said. I called, you didn't answer. Then I saw the bank's number on your caller ID, so I drove down. He sighed. Of course she noticed. I'm fine, he repeated, just trying to figure things out. She noticed the stack of papers on the counter, picked them up, scanned the first page. Her eyes widened. They're taking the diner. James didn't answer, and that told her enough. She looked at the metal case on the table. She didn't open it, but she didn't have to. That money they offered you, she whispered. Uncle James, you should take it. James shook his head instantly. No, it's too much. I don't want to owe anyone. You wouldn't owe them, she insisted. They're not buying you, they're thanking you. There's a difference. Feels the same, he muttered. She stepped closer. You've spent your whole life giving. You helped half this town when they couldn't pay for a meal. You covered heating bills for families who didn't even know it was you. You raised me when you could have walked away, and now the one time someone tries to help you, you push them away. Her voice cracked. You can't keep bleeding yourself dry just because you think you're supposed to. James opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then another engine sound cut through the air, a smooth low hum that made his heart jump before he even turned around. The limo, again. The old couple stepped inside the diner, and the moment they saw James's face, their expressions changed. Concern, real concern, the kind only people who'd been through hell recognized in someone else. What happened? The woman asked. James didn't answer. His niece pointed to the bank papers. They're taking his diner, she said. The couple exchanged a look. James couldn't read. Elliot stepped closer. How much do you need? James shook his head fast. No, I already said, this isn't a gift. Elliot cut in. It's an investment, in a place that saved us, in a man who did what no one else would. James tried again. I won't take your money. His niece spoke before they could. He'll lose the diner. The woman turned to James, her voice calm but firm. This diner is more than walls and a grill. It's a refuge, a place where kindness still means something. If it disappears, the town loses more than a business. James clenched his fists, torn between pride and desperation. Elliot placed the metal case back in front of him. You decide how much you take. Not us, only what you need to save your diner. James stared at the case. He didn't want to accept charity. He didn't want to feel like he'd been bought. But he also realized something he'd been ignoring. If he didn't accept help now, every person he'd ever tried to help would lose the place they relied on. Slowly, painfully, he opened the case. His hand trembled, not from excitement, but from fear. He wrote a number on a piece of paper, the smallest amount possible to clear the debt and fix the diner's failing systems. Nothing more. He slid it across the table. If I take anything, he said quietly, I want it to be a loan. I'll pay you back, every dollar. Elliot smiled. Not the polished smile from TV interviews, but something real. Then we'll consider it a loan. The woman nodded, and the rest, consider it support for the community. No repayment. James swallowed hard. Why? Because you invested in humanity long before we showed up, she said. This is our chance to invest back. James didn't argue. He didn't have the strength. As the couple signed the agreement and prepared the funds, James looked around the diner, the worn booths, the scratched tables, the old jukebox that barely worked, and felt something shift. For the first time in years, he saw not what the diner had been, but what it could still become. And he realized something simple, quiet, but true. He wasn't being rescued, he was being given a chance to rebuild. For the first time in years, James felt hope simmer somewhere behind his ribs. The loan was cleared. The diner wasn't drowning anymore. The old heating system could finally be replaced, the roof patched, the ancient wiring brought up to code. It should have been a victory, a breath of fresh air, a small miracle after too many storms. But something shifted in town before the paint even dried on the under-renovation sign. And it wasn't good. It started quietly, sideways glances, awkward smiles that dropped too fast, people whispering before he walked into a room. At first James chalked it up to curiosity. After all, it wasn't every day a limousine parked outside Whitaker's Haven. He assumed the gossip would fade after a week, but it didn't fade, it grew. By the end of the first week, people stopped coming in altogether. Not everyone, just enough that the silence inside the diner felt heavier than the sound of the storm had been that night. He let the couple in. James didn't understand the shift until the morning he overheard two regulars talking in front of the hardware store. Probably sold the diner, one man muttered. Or worse, the other replied. Probably took money from those big city folks. You know what they say, these rich types don't just show up without wanting something. James stood behind them, holding a box of screws, frozen in place. Hey James, the first man said when he finally noticed him. His smile was tight, rehearsed. Heard you got visitors. James forced a nod. Yeah, just some folks passing through. They helped me save the diner. The second man's brows lifted. Helped you? How much they paying you now? Bet they bought half the place. James blinked, stunned by the tone. Accusation, not curiosity. They didn't buy anything. It was just support. Support, the man repeated, like the word tasted bad. Right. They walked away without another word. James stood alone on the sidewalk, the cold biting deeper than before. Things got worse over the next few days. People stopped making eye contact. They stopped waving. Some crossed the street when they saw him coming, as if wealth or whatever they thought had touched him was contagious in the wrong way. What hurt wasn't the distance. It was the betrayal, silent but clear. The town he'd fed, helped, protected, had started to look at him like a stranger. Even worse, the rumors took on a life of their own. Posts popped up on the local Facebook group. Whitaker's Haven sold out. New owners incoming. Guess we know why the bank suddenly forgave his debt. James read them late one night and felt something crumble inside him. Not anger, disappointment. He didn't expect applause, but he didn't expect suspicion to be the first reaction either. He closed his laptop and turned off the lights. The empty diner glowed softly under the street lamp. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider in his own life. The real blow came on a Tuesday afternoon. James had stepped out to throw away the trash when he heard two older women talking near the alley behind the store next door. Poor folks can't go there anymore, one woman whispered. He's fancy now. Bet he'll raise the prices. The other scoffed. He already raised them once last year. That was for supplies, James said automatically before he could stop himself. They both jumped, startled. He hadn't meant to scare them, he just meant to explain. But their reaction told him everything. Fear, distrust, distance. He opened his palms, trying to soften the moment. I'm not changing anything. The place will stay the same. One woman forced a smile, thin, brittle. Sure, James. Of course. They hurried off. The smile dropped before they even reached the corner. James leaned against the dumpster, exhaling a shaky breath. His chest felt tight, not from anger but from something heavier. He thought about all the meals he'd comped, all the hours he'd stayed open late, all the nights he'd given people rides home when their cars broke down. He didn't help people to get something back, but losing their trust this fast stung more than he wanted to admit. That night, after locking up early, James sat alone at the counter. The old neon sign flickered through the window, painting a wash of blue across the booths. He glanced around the diner. Every seat held a memory: laughing kids, couples on dates, lonely travelers finding comfort in a warm meal. It wasn't just a business, it was a heartbeat, a conversation, a refuge. So why did it feel like everyone thought he'd traded all that away? He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to ward off the ache behind them. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but tonight the weight settled deep. Maybe I messed up, he whispered to the empty room. Maybe letting them help was a mistake. He didn't believe that, not deeply, but he was tired. Bone tired. He looked out the window at the quiet street. Snow fell gently, covering everything in pale white, a slow blanket that made the world look peaceful, even when it wasn't. Then the headlights appeared. A car slowed in front of the diner, paused a moment, and kept going. James didn't recognize the vehicle, but the feeling that washed over him was unmistakable. People weren't just guessing anymore. They were watching. He swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. The kindness he'd shown had started a chain reaction he couldn't stop. But now for the first time, the chain felt like it was looping back around his neck. He closed the diner early that night, turned off the sign, dimmed the lights, left the place dark even though he normally kept it warm until midnight. On the walk home, the cold stung harder than usual, like the air itself was reminding him he wasn't untouchable. Houses he'd passed 1,000 times seemed unfamiliar, their windows glowing softly, the silhouettes inside gathered for dinner, watching TV, living their quiet lives, and he no longer felt like part of any of them. The moment he reached his porch, his phone buzzed, a notification. From the town community group, someone had posted a picture of him stepping out of the limousine earlier that week. The caption, "Guess the rest of us don't matter anymore." James shut off his phone. He didn't want to see who liked the post, who commented, who defended him, who didn't. He leaned against his front door, jaw clenched, eyes burning. He had never wanted wealth, never wanted attention. All he'd ever wanted was to serve good food and give people a place to feel safe. Now, he wasn't sure anyone saw him that way anymore. And for the first time since he was a teenager, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. The town he'd dedicated his life to was starting to turn its back on him. The next morning, James woke up to the kind of dread that sat heavy on the chest before his eyes were even open. Something felt wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet, even for him. When he stepped outside, the cold slapped him awake, but that wasn't what made his stomach twist. It was the way Mr. Collins, who lived 2 doors down, paused while scraping ice off his windshield, stared at James for a long second, and then turned away without so much as a nod. Not even a half-hearted wave. That tiny moment hit harder than it should have. James walked to the diner on foot, crunching through the snow. The sun was barely up, casting a pale orange glow. Normally, the morning light made the town feel alive. This morning it felt like walking through a memory of a place he used to belong to. He reached the diner and unlocked the door. The familiar smell of coffee grounds and old wood should have comforted him. Instead, it only reminded him that yesterday had been the slowest day in years. He brewed fresh coffee, opened the blinds halfway, and stood behind the counter, waiting for the bell to ring. It didn't. Not for the first hour, or the second, or the third. Around 10:30, he checked his phone, something he usually avoided during work. A notification popped up from the town's Facebook group. His heart tightened. He clicked anyway. The post had over 100 comments, a zoomed-in photo of him stepping out of the limousine. The caption read, "Whitaker's Haven has new friends, guess the rest of us aren't enough anymore." In the comments, people argued back and forth. "Told you he sold out. Rich people don't show up for free. Watch. He'll raise prices next. Shame. Used to be a good man." A few tried defending him, but their voices were drowned out by suspicion and anger. James stared at the screen until the words blurred. He set the phone down and stepped away from the counter, breathing slowly through his nose. It felt like someone had taken a piece of his life, his reputation, his place in the town, and crushed it in their fist. He wasn't angry, he was hurt, more than he wanted to admit. Around noon the door finally opened. For a split second he felt relief. Maybe someone came to eat. Maybe things were turning around. But the man who walked in wasn't here for food. Carl Benson, the owner of a rival cafe on the other side of town, stepped inside wearing a smirk that didn't fit his face. He walked up to the counter slowly, almost pleased with himself. "Heard you're doing big things now," Carl said. "Got billionaire buddies and all." James didn't respond. Carl leaned in a little. Just wanted to warn you. Folks don't like feeling replaced, especially not by rich folks who don't belong here. James clenched his jaw. I didn't replace anyone. Carl shrugged. Maybe, but people believe what they see, and what they saw was you climbing into a limo like you're too good for the rest of us. James stepped back. I haven't changed. Carl held up his hands. Hey, not my fight. Just saying town's talking. And it ain't pretty. Then he left, letting the door swing hard behind him. James stood motionless for a long moment. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. He'd taken the smallest amount possible from Elliot, just enough to keep the diner alive. He hadn't splurged, he hadn't bragged, and somehow, that still painted him as the villain. Maybe he should have expected it. Small towns didn't like sudden changes. They liked steady people, predictable people. James had been one of those people, until now. By late afternoon, James stepped outside to take a break. It was snowing again, gentle and quiet. The street looked peaceful, but the town felt tense, like everyone was waiting for him to do something that confirmed their suspicions. He walked to the end of the block and overheard two teenage boys talking loudly as they passed by. My mom said he took hush money, one said. That's why the diner's staying open. The other laughed. Why'd a billionaire help him anyway? Dude probably knows something. James's breath hitched. A wave of embarrassment washed over him, not because teens were gossiping, but because their parents were feeding the narrative. He turned back to the diner. His diner. The place he'd kept open through blizzards, heat waves and sleepless nights. The place he'd poured his entire life into. And now it was slipping away, not because of debt, but because of doubt. He leaned against the wall outside the diner, running both hands over his face. He'd never felt this helpless, not when the bank threatened to shut him down, not when his brother died, not even when he took in his niece with nothing but a diner paycheck to raise her. But this, being misunderstood by everyone he'd cared for, this crushed him in a way he hadn't prepared for. The doorbell chimed. James stepped inside automatically, half expecting an actual customer. But it was Elliot and his wife again. Their presence should have lifted his spirits. Instead, James felt exposed, like being seen by them meant letting them witness him failing. You look tired, the woman said softly. James laughed without humor. I've had better days. Elliot studied him with the calm gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading rooms. The town is turning against you. James flinched. Yeah, they don't trust me anymore. And how does that make you feel? The woman asked. James swallowed hard. Like I don't belong here. Like everything I've done didn't matter. Silence filled the diner, heavy but not hostile. Elliot stepped closer. James' kindness is easy to love when it costs nothing. But when people see someone rise, even a little, they panic. They think they're being left behind. James stared at the floor. I'm not leaving anyone. I'm trying to keep this place alive. Then fight for it, Elliot said. Not against the town. Against the silence. You hid when they started talking, and silence is where rumors grow. James looked up sharply. The words hit deeper than expected. You want me to defend myself? He asked. I want you to tell the truth, Elliot replied. Not for them, for you. James shook his head. They won't listen. Some will, the woman said gently. That's enough. For the first time in days, James felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not pride, but a quiet determination. He thought about the meals he'd given out quietly, the families he'd helped, the nights he'd stayed late just to make sure someone lonely didn't eat alone. And he realized something. If he didn't speak now, he'd lose the diner, not to the bank, but to the very people he'd tried to serve. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll talk to them. Elliot smiled. Good. And James, the woman added, one conversation won't fix everything. But your honesty will start something those rumors can't kill. James exhaled, steady and certain. Then I guess it's time. He looked around the diner, the booths, the counter, the old coffee maker, and felt a spark light inside him. For the first time in weeks he wasn't afraid. He was ready, ready to own his story, ready to reclaim his place, ready to rebuild not just the diner, but the trust he'd lost. Whatever it took. James didn't sleep the night before the town hall meeting. Not out of fear. Fear was something he understood. This was different. It was the weight of knowing tomorrow mattered. Tomorrow decided whether Whitaker's Haven stayed a home or became a memory. He spent the entire night cleaning the diner, even though it was already spotless. Polishing silverware, rearranging the chairs, wiping the counter in long, slow circles. By sunrise, the diner looked the same as always, but James felt different. The meeting was at 4. By 3:30, the sky was already dimming with early winter dusk. James walked toward the community center with his hands in his pockets, breath fogging in front of him. Streets he knew by heart felt unfamiliar now, but he kept walking. When he pushed through the doors, the room grew quiet. Dozens of faces turned toward him, some embarrassed, some guarded, some still cold. But they were all there, waiting. James cleared his throat. His voice sounded too small in the echoing room. I wanted to talk. No one spoke, no one encouraged him, but no one stopped him either. I know there've been rumors, James said slowly, about me, about the diner, about money. A few heads dipped, guilty. I didn't sell Whitaker's Haven. I didn't hand it over to anyone. I didn't take a fortune, or a partnership, or whatever people have been saying. He paused, then added softly, the truth is, I almost lost the diner. That caused a ripple. Eyes widened, whispers started. Yeah, James continued, I was behind on payments, I was drowning, and I didn't tell anyone. Maybe that's where the misunderstanding started. He took a breath. A couple came through during the storm. I helped them. They helped me back. I only took enough to pay off my debt and repair what was falling apart. And I'm paying them back. All of it. Someone called out, then who are those rich folks we saw? James steadied himself. Friends, he said simply. Unexpected ones. But friends. They didn't buy me. They didn't buy this town. They believed in what the diner means. Silence settled again. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I know some of you think I've changed, or that I turned my back on the people who've been with me all these years. His voice cracked slightly. I haven't, and I never will. Everything good in my life is because of this town. He let the truth sit there, raw and vulnerable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to show you I'm still the same man I was before all this. If the diner is going to have a future, I want it to be with all of you. For a moment nothing happened. Then a voice rose from the back, old Mr. Davis, who James once let sit in the diner all night during a rough winter. You fed me for free for 3 days, Mr. Davis said. No questions asked. Another voice broke in, Martha, the school bus driver. You fixed my tire at midnight, and wouldn't let me pay you a dime. A third voice, shaky and emotional. You kept the diner open for us the night my husband passed. No one else would have done that. Soon half the room was speaking at once. Stories, memories, moments James had long forgotten, or never thought twice about. Kindness he never counted, kindness he didn't think people noticed, but they had, they always had. And now they remembered. The room softened, the tension lifted. People moved closer, some patting James on the shoulder, some offering quiet apologies. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just real, sincere. It was enough. The next week, James hung a new sign on the diner door. Whitaker's Haven, free open day. Anyone who walked in got a warm meal, no charge, no questions. The line stretched down the block. Old regulars, kids, families, travelers, even the folks who had spread rumors showed up. Sheepish but hopeful, James welcomed them all the same. Around noon, Elliot and his wife arrived, not in a limo, but in a modest sedan they'd borrowed from their security team. They sat at the counter like ordinary customers, eating grilled cheese and tomato soup, while chatting with people who'd only seen them through gossip and fear. The town warmed to them immediately. Kindness traveled fast here, faster than rumors when given the chance. James worked the grill and the counter at the same time, energy returning to him in waves. For the first time in months, the diner felt alive. Later that afternoon, his niece taped a freshly painted wooden sign above the door. It read, "Come in from the cold." James stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise, a reminder of everything the diner had been, and everything it would be again. By evening, when the last customer left, and the wind picked up outside, James stood alone in the doorway, watching snow drift gently across the street. Whitaker's Haven wasn't perfect, neither was he, but the diner was standing, not because of money, or luck, or miracles, but because of people choosing to believe in it again. He exhaled, breath soft in the cold air. Inside, the lights glowed warm. Tables were messy from a full day. The air still smelled like soup and laughter. For the first time in a long time, James didn't feel alone. He closed the door, turning the sign to open even though it was late. He knew someone out there might need a place to sit, a meal, or just a moment of warmth. And Whitaker's Haven would be waiting, just like it had always been. If you want more emotional, heartwarming stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, where stories of kindness, healing, and second chances come to life through powerful narration. Follow for more touching stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that might just change someone's day. Thank you for reading. See you in the next story.